Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've lined up over 2 hours of real-life Reddit stories to keep you company, whether you're winding down for the night or just need something playing in the background. And the gameplay I got today is pretty crazy, because halfway through the vid, we fight the dragon for the first time in the server. So if you choose to stay awake and watch, definitely stick around for that. Also, I try to post these videos daily, so whenever you need something to relax or fall asleep to, feel free to come back to the channel. But anyways, kick back, relax, and enjoy the vid. This first story is about a dad who tried to discipline his kids with a curse jar until things didn't end up the way he expected. Growing up, my siblings and I were generally pretty good kids. We didn't cause a lot of trouble, and most of the time we followed the rules. But every now and then, especially as we got a little older, a curse word would slip out. It wasn't constant, it wasn't wild, but we had picked up enough language to test the limits here and there. One night at the dinner table, my brother, who was usually the boldest of the three of us, decided to drop a full-on F-bomb right in the middle of a conversation. The word hung in the air like a firecracker, and the entire table went silent. My mom froze. My fork paused midair, and my dad immediately set his jaw. You could just tell he had reached his breaking point. He put down his fork, looked at all of us very seriously, and said something along the lines of, "That's it, I've had enough of this. From now on, we're starting a curse jar." He explained the rules in a calm but stern dad voice. Every single person in the household, no exceptions, would have to pay 25 cents into the jar every time they cursed. My siblings and I glanced at each other nervously, trying to figure out if he really meant everyone. Finally, one of us asked tentatively, "Wait, everyone? Like, even you?" He nodded firmly. "Yes, everyone. If I curse, I pay too." And that's where his plan completely backfired. See, the truth was, most of our swearing habits didn't come from school or from our friends. They came straight from Dad. He had a tendency to let words fly whenever he stubbed his toe, dropped something, got frustrated, or even just told a story with a little too much enthusiasm. He was our main role model, and without even meaning to, he had been the one teaching us half the vocabulary he now wanted to police. By the end of that very first dinner, we had already caught him twice. 2 slip-ups later, we had 50 cents in the jar, courtesy of Dad himself. My siblings and I could hardly contain our smiles. This wasn't just a punishment anymore. This was an opportunity. Over the next few days, it turned into a full-blown competition. My siblings and I treated it like a game. We became hyper-aware of every single thing Dad said. If he muttered under his breath while fixing something, we'd pounce. "That's 25 cents. If he let something slip while watching TV, we'd gleefully point to the jar. He tried to protest a couple of times, saying it wasn't a real curse word, but we held him to the same rules he had set for us. And the best part was, he actually went along with it, grumbling the whole time, of course. But he paid up every single time. It almost became a ritual. The sound of coins clinking into the jar after one of his slip-ups became part of our daily background noise. By the end of the week, we counted it all up. The total was $53. For kids our age, that felt like a fortune. We couldn't believe how much money had piled up so quickly, all from Dad trying to enforce a little discipline. Instead of being mad about it, though, he actually leaned into it. He took us all out to dinner using the curse jar money. Sitting in that restaurant, eating food paid for entirely by Dad's own bad language felt like the ultimate victory for us. We didn't even care where we went or what we ordered. The fun part was knowing we'd earned it just by holding him accountable. But then, almost as quickly as it had started, it ended. Not long after that dinner, Dad had to leave town for a business trip. He was gone for a little while, and when he came back, it was like the whole thing had never happened. The jar disappeared from the counter. The rule was never mentioned again. None of us brought it up, and he certainly didn't either. It just quietly faded into family history. Looking back on it now, I think it's hilarious how quickly the tables turned. Dad wanted to teach us a lesson about cleaning up our language, but he ended up being the one footing the bill. The curse jar became less of a punishment and more of an inside joke that only lasted a week, but gave us one of the funniest family stories we still talk about. That story wraps up here. That whole setup collapsing in just a week is so funny. You can tell the kids treated it like a sport, and the dad never stood a chance. The fact that it ended with dinner on his dime makes it even better. It feels like one of those family stories that lives on forever. even if the jar itself didn't. This next story is about a fiancé who uncovered his partner's betrayal with her own cousin-in-law and decided to expose everything in a way no one could ignore. This all went down over a decade ago, back when I was engaged. Looking back now, I don't regret a thing. I had been with her for 3 years, but over time I started noticing how controlling she was becoming. She wanted every single detail of my day, wanted me to share my schedule in advance, and if anything changed even slightly, she would blow up about it. She always chalked it up to paranoia from past relationships, but I had never cheated, never strayed, and never given her any reason to doubt me. Something about it just didn't sit right. Eventually, things stopped adding up. She worked long shifts at a fabrication facility, 12 hours Monday through Friday, except Wednesdays, when she supposedly worked half days. Around the same time, her controlling behavior got worse. That was when a light bulb went off for me. With my job, if I put in overtime, I could take time off later, and I had some days banked. So I decided to test a theory. One Wednesday morning, I got dressed like I was heading to work, but instead of leaving town, I parked across from our apartment complex, where I could see both exits. After about an hour, I spotted a red Mustang I recognized right away. It belonged to her cousin-in-law. Now here's where my preparation paid off. I had set up an old laptop with remote access. The webcam was positioned to capture the living room, the doors, and even the kitchen. I got a motion alert, logged in, and sure enough, there he was. He walked straight in, and before long, she was unbuttoning his shirt and kissing him. They didn't even bother going to the bedroom, right there on the couch. I didn't just sit on the footage. I created a URL link to the live stream and sent it to both our friend group chat and the family group chat. Calls started pouring into her phone, but she ignored them. Until finally, she picked up, and the first words out of her cousin's mother's mouth on speakerphone were, "Stop sleeping with my son." The look on their faces was priceless. She tried to deny it, but the truth was already out. Her cousin scrambled to get dressed, tripped over himself, and even cracked his head on the coffee table. By the time he stumbled out, I was waiting at the front of the complex. He froze, started crying, and begged for forgiveness. Let's just say things got heated, and I ended up in a cast for 6 weeks. Luckily for me, since he was trespassing, it didn't come back on me legally. When I finally walked into the apartment, she was a mess, crying, shaking, and fully clothed again. I gave her 1 hour to pack her things. Everything else, furniture, electronics, even the lease, was mine. And because of how embarrassed her family was, she couldn't stay with her mom, her brothers, or even the cousin's mother. Word spread quickly around town, and she became completely untouchable. That's where the story ends. What stood out the most here was how methodical he was, setting up the laptop, waiting in the parking lot, and then exposing everything in one move. The part that really made me pause was that phone call, with the cousin's own mom being the one to drop the hammer. And honestly, the detail of the cousin tripping over the coffee table almost feels like something out of a movie. It's messy, but the way everything unraveled was wild to picture. This next story is about a traveler who just needed a restroom break, but ended up in a shouting match with a furious restaurant owner. This story takes me back about 20 years, when I was vacationing in Chicago with a buddy. We had been spending the day downtown, exploring the city, browsing shops, spending money, and just soaking in the atmosphere. Things were going great, until my stomach gave me that unmistakable warning rumble. You know the one, the kind that tells you you're on borrowed time and need to find a restroom, fast. Here's the problem. Back then, at least in that part of Chicago near Wrigley Field, public restrooms were almost non-existent. Every place had those signs on the door. Restrooms are for customers only. And usually, that's fair. My plan was simple. I'd duck into the first place I found, order a sandwich and a drink to go, and use the restroom while I waited. That way everyone would be happy. So I walked into a restaurant I spotted. The strange thing was, the entire place was empty. No customers, no servers, no one at the counter. It felt like I had walked into an abandoned set. I called out, "Hello?" First softly, then louder. A few more times. Nothing. The place was completely silent. Meanwhile, my stomach made it clear I didn't have the luxury of standing around any longer. I spotted the restroom, slipped inside, and locked the door behind me. It was just one of those small, single-toilet bathrooms. Finally, I sat down, relieved that I had made it in time. But just as I was in the middle of, well, taking care of business, someone started pounding on the door. Not a polite knock. No. This was full-on cop busting down your door pounding. Each thud echoed in the tiny room, and the person on the other side started yelling at the top of their lungs. I couldn't even understand what they were saying, because it was in another language, but the tone was unmistakable, furious. I tried to call back through the door, explaining that I had wanted to order something, but no one had been at the counter. I promised I'd make an order as soon as I finished, but the banging and shouting kept going for what felt like forever. In reality, it was probably 3 or 4 minutes, but in the middle of that situation, it was an eternity. Finally, I finished up, washed my hands, and nervously opened the door. Standing there was a short, angry man, glaring daggers at me. "Customers only," he barked immediately. I quickly apologized, explaining that I was going to order but hadn't seen anyone to take it, and that it had been an emergency. He didn't care. He muttered about freeloaders, while stomping back toward the counter. Trying to smooth things over, I picked up a menu and asked if I could place an order to go. He said yes, but with this tone that dripped with annoyance. Then he added, "Next time, order before you use the restroom. I'm sick of people like you." At that point, any sympathy I had for him evaporated. My original plan had been to buy a drink and a sandwich, but the way he was insulting me over and over made me decide differently. So I went through the motions, placed an order, and waited until he disappeared into the back to make it. And the moment he was gone, I walked out. I told my buddy what happened, and we both laughed as we sat down on a park bench across the street. We were close enough to see the restaurant's front doors, but far enough away that he wouldn't immediately spot us. After a little while, the angry man emerged, holding a takeout bag and a soda cup. He looked around, realized I wasn't there, and absolutely lost it. He started cursing in English and his native language, waving the bag around like it was a trophy of wasted effort. He could have had a sale. All he had to do was treat me like a normal customer. Instead, his insults and temper tantrum left him standing on the sidewalk screaming, while I enjoyed a stress-free laugh with my friend. That's the end of this story. This one was funny because of how over the top the whole situation became. All the guy had to do was be patient, and instead he ended up red-faced in front of random pedestrians. The funniest detail was him storming outside with the bag, like he expected a dramatic showdown. Sometimes people really do create their own misery by doubling down on anger. This next story is about a wedding ruined by a brother who just couldn't stand not being the center of attention, and the revenge that followed after he crossed the line one too many times. Growing up, my younger brother Todd was always the golden child. His birth was complicated. He spent a month in the ICU, and ever since then my parents have bent over backwards for him. Abby, our sister, and I learned pretty quickly that Todd would get whatever he wanted, even if it meant we were pushed aside, and Todd thrived on it. He made a habit of stealing the spotlight at big moments, whether it was my celebrations, Abby's, or even a cousin's. It got worse when he started dating Lucy. She actually announced her pregnancy at Abby's baby shower, completely hijacking her moment. So when I got engaged to Michelle, I wanted to just elope, keep it simple. But she wanted her family there, which meant I had to invite mine. That's when Todd almost struck again. A few days before the wedding, my best man Jim spotted a jewelry store receipt slip out of Todd's pocket. When he confronted him, it turned into an argument. Jim told me what happened, and I knew immediately what Todd was planning. I pulled him aside and told him he was out as a groomsman. I wasn't going to risk him proposing at my wedding. Of course, he ran to our parents crying, and suddenly, I was the bad guy. They insisted he wouldn't do anything, but I reminded them of his history. Eventually, they made him promise he'd behave, but I still warned him. If he tried anything, he'd regret it. And sure enough, he did. During Michelle's father-daughter dance, Todd walked right over to Lucy, dropped down on one knee, and proposed in front of everyone. The whole room's attention shifted from my wife and her dad to Todd and Lucy. I was furious, but I had been ready for this. Jim and I had a plan. We'd hired a woman to act as Todd's secret side piece. She cornered him and Lucy later that night, claiming she was pregnant with his baby. Todd denied it, but when she called his phone, and I'd already tampered with it so it looked incriminating, it was game over. Lucy threw the ring back at him and stormed out in tears. Todd knew instantly I was behind it. After the honeymoon, I ignored all his calls and texts. Lucy kicked him out, tossed his stuff, and even started denying him access to their child. When he finally demanded I clear his name, I just texted back that I had no idea what he was talking about and included a screenshot of the wedding bill with a message about him owing me half. Michelle knew the whole time what I had planned and gave me the green light after Todd ruined her moment with her dad. I felt pretty satisfied, even though Abby later said I might have gone too far. That's the end of this story. Honestly, what stood out here was just how predictable Todd was. Even after being warned, he still couldn't resist stealing the spotlight. The fake side piece twist was brutal, but also kind of fitting, given how many times he'd ruined big moments before. I can see why Abby thought it was too much, but at the same time, you can only push someone so far before they snap back. This one definitely feels like years of frustration boiling over all at once. This next story is about someone whose sister tried to make them cancel a carefully planned beach holiday so she could drag them along to a yoga retreat instead. I had been planning my summer holiday for months. I mean, down to the tiniest details. I had my early morning flights booked, my Airbnb confirmations neatly filed away, and even a Pinterest board full of beachy outfits and local food spots I wanted to try. Everything was ready, lined up like dominoes waiting to fall into place. 2 weeks of sun, sea, and sanity were waiting for me on the other side. And then came my sister. Now, let me be clear. I do love my sister, but she has a certain reputation in the family. She's what I call chronically spoiled. The kind of person who thinks the word compromise means she gets 80% of what she wants, while the rest of us get whatever scraps are left. So when her name popped up on my phone just 3 days before my trip, I had a bad feeling. She didn't text, she didn't send a casual email. She didn't even try the whole, hey, you around kind of thing. She called me, and her voice had that sugary stretch to it, like she was already trying to soften me up. Hey, she said, drawing the word out like she was singing. So I was thinking, and that's when my internal alarms went off. Red alert. Something was about to drop. She went on, I need a favor. Can you cancel your trip and come with me to that yoga retreat in the mountains? I sat in silence for a second. Not because I was considering it. Absolutely not. I was just stunned. The sheer audacity of that sentence was almost impressive. Cancel my entire holiday, one I had saved and planned for months, so she could find her inner peace at some rustic cabin that didn't even have Wi-Fi? I reminded her that I had already paid for everything. The flights, the stay, all of it. She shrugged it off like I'd misplaced a pair of socks. You'll get over it. I need the emotional support. This, mind you, was the same sister who once ghosted me for 3 days when I asked her to help me carry groceries inside. But now, suddenly, I was her emotional Sherpa. I asked her why she couldn't go with one of her many friends. And trust me, she has plenty. She has about 500 contacts she calls friends. Her answer? They're not you. I knew exactly what that meant. Translation, they wouldn't cancel their lives for me, but you just might. I'll admit it, I almost caved. Years of family conditioning will do that to you. I could feel that old guilt creeping in, the little voice that says, maybe you should put her needs first. But then I pictured myself stuck in that retreat, eating kale soup in silence, my beach towel still folded back home, untouched. And in that moment, my answer became clear. I said no. She didn't take it well. She huffed, she puffed, and then she called me selfish. I actually laughed at that one. Me, selfish? For keeping the holiday I had already planned and paid for? Meanwhile, she was the one trying to hijack it. She even tried pulling Mom into it, like a kid dragging in the referee. To her credit, Mom actually stood her ground. She said, you can't steal someone's vacation, sweetie. And that was that. The best part came 2 days later. I was scrolling through Instagram, and there it was. My sister's story. She had gone to the yoga retreat anyway, with her best friend Tiffany. Guess I wasn't so essential after all. Meanwhile, I was stretched out on a beach chair, sipping a coconut drink with the sun on my face and not a single kale leaf in sight. That's where the story ends. That one really shows how bold some people can be when they're used to getting their way. The sister pulled every card she could, but in the end, she still got what she wanted without wrecking anyone else's plans. What stood out most was how satisfying it must have felt to enjoy that beach knowing you dodged a week of kale and chanting. This next story is about a kid who lost money thanks to a so-called friend's petty prank, only to stumble into the ultimate payback years later in the most unexpected way. Back in middle school, right before smartphones really took off, I got my first cell phone. It was one of those slide phones with a pay-as-you-go plan that charged 10 cents for every call or text and 25 cents for each photo sent or received. My parents gave me $100 a year to cover it, and if I went over, I had to use my own birthday or Christmas money. Because of that, I was really careful. Most of my friends were good about it too. They'd call and let it ring once so I could call back from a landline, or they'd email me or send messages over Skype. Things worked fine until 7th grade when Derek joined our group. At first we thought he was funny, but it didn't take long to realize he was just a troublemaker. He stirred up drama, manipulated people, and always played the victim when anyone called him out. Parents liked him because he could turn on the charm, but in reality, he was exhausting to be around. And unlike everyone else, he completely ignored my phone situation. He'd constantly send me dumb picture memes, even though I told him more than once that every photo cost me money. One day, he got mad at me and decided to go nuclear. He spammed me with over 100 picture messages. Most of them were just those old lolcats memes. He kept going until my balance hit zero and my phone service shut off. I lost $40 in one day because of him. I was furious and demanded he pay me back. He just smirked and said it wasn't his problem. I went home angry and told my dad, expecting him to confront Derek's mom or maybe even take it to small claims court. But my dad told me some battles weren't worth fighting. Instead, he took me to the carrier's store. He put $50 back on the account, had them change my number, and even insisted they block Derek's number, even though they originally said it wasn't possible on that plan. He wouldn't leave until they did. I got my phone working again, but I never forgot the $40 Derek had basically stolen from me. That summer, my parents switched to a family plan with iPhones, and I finally had unlimited texting. Eventually, our whole friend group had a falling out with Derek, and he ended up leaving the school a year later. I thought that was the end of it. Fast forward years later. I'd finished college and was back home for a few months before starting a new job. One Saturday morning, I stopped by some garage sales and ended up at Derek's house. I recognized his mom right away, though I don't think she recognized me. I noticed some Pokemon napkins for sale, and when I picked them up, she mentioned how Derek had been obsessed with Pokemon his whole life. That's when I casually asked if she had any more Pokemon stuff. She shrugged and said she still had a few boxes in the attic. She let me inside to help bring them down. At first it was random junk, ornaments and old decorations. But then she opened a box absolutely packed with Pokemon games, all in their original boxes. I kept my cool on the outside, but inside, I was freaking out. Derek had always bragged about his collection back in the day. He had every mainline Pokemon game, mint condition, plus consoles, binders of cards, and tons of Lego sets. I remembered how protective he was of it, how he wouldn't even let people touch them. And now, here I was, standing in his house with his mom ready to get rid of it all. When we finished bringing everything down, there were 5 big boxes filled with games, consoles, binders of cards, and Lego sets, including old Star Wars ones that collectors go crazy for. I asked her how much, and she thought for a moment before saying $100 per box, or $400 for all 5. I told her I'd take the lot, ran to the ATM, and loaded everything into my dad's truck. I knew right away it was worth a fortune. I handed it all to my uncle, who sells collectibles on eBay. He agreed to list everything individually, only taking 10% for his trouble. We logged every single item, and the total estimated value came out around $40,000. That number felt poetic, exactly 1,000 times the $40 Derek had cost me back in middle school. By the end of the summer, most of it was sold. The check my uncle handed me was life-changing. It wiped out the rest of my student loans and even covered the down payment on a new car. After all those years, Derek's collection became my ultimate revenge. That's where the story ends. What struck me the most here was how the whole thing came full circle. Losing $40 back in middle school felt huge at the time, and years later it turned into this insane payoff. The detail that really made me laugh was Derek's mom casually unloading his mint condition collection for a few $100 when he used to guard it like treasure. It's rare to see karma work out in such a clean, almost cinematic way. This next story is about a sibling fight that broke out when one brother decided he shouldn't have to pay for internet anymore, even though the whole family relies on it. I live at home with my family, and I'm the one who somehow got stuck managing all of our bills. That's already a headache I never wanted. It's not that I enjoy it or that I'm naturally organized. It's just that my mom doesn't want to deal with it. My brother definitely doesn't want to deal with it. And the one or two times they tried, it turned into complete disasters. To give you an example, once they mismanaged our gas bills so badly, we ended up with a $400 charge. After that, I became the unwilling bill manager, even though I hate it. Because of that, I've built up this system where I ask for money from everyone way ahead of due dates. Otherwise, they're late or they forget, and I end up covering bills with my own money, which feels humiliating. Then I have to chase them around afterward like some desperate landlord trying to collect rent. It makes me feel pathetic, even though I know it's not my fault. So here's what happened. I'm driving home today after classes and work. I'm in university, and I also work part-time at the airport, which is exhausting. I get this text from my brother, who works full-time, saying this will be the last time he's paying for the internet. His reasoning? He doesn't need it because he's at work most of the time and can just use his phone data. I was already tired and in no mood for nonsense, but I let it go until I got home. When I walked in, he was waiting for me and repeated it to my face. I don't need internet, so I'm not paying anymore. I looked at him and said, fine, then I'll call the company and cancel the whole thing. I knew saying that would get under his skin because even if he doesn't think he needs it, he still uses it. Maybe not for hours every night like me, but enough that he'd feel the loss. Plus, our mom and our sister also need it. My sister's in high school, and I need it for my classes and design work. Canceling wasn't really an option, but I wanted to make it clear. If he opts out, that affects all of us. He got mad right away. What about everyone else? He snapped. And that's when I lost it. I started yelling because that was exactly my point. He doesn't live alone. He doesn't get to decide, on a whim, that just because something isn't convenient for him, the rest of us have to either shoulder his share or go without. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, because this is just one example of how self-centered he can be. He doesn't notice how much mom and I already pay for things he uses every single day. He wants to do laundry? Great, but it's our laundry detergent sitting there. He wants a meal? Half the time it's ingredients mom bought. He finishes his milk? Suddenly he's using the lactose-free one that I bought for myself. When he wanted rice, we ended up with a new rice cooker. And who do you think paid for that? It's always like this. He benefits from what we cover, but when it comes to splitting costs, he acts like he's above it. The funniest part, if I wasn't so annoyed, was when he suggested I call the internet company and pause the service. Like, that's even an option. This isn't a video game. You can't hit pause on an internet subscription and then magically turn it back on when you feel like paying again. So yeah, I yelled. I was dead tired, I had a headache, and I couldn't believe his selfishness. To me, it wasn't about the money itself, but about the principle. He wants to opt out of shared bills, as if he's living in his own place, but then still enjoys all the shared benefits of living in a household with other people. Now I'm sitting here wondering if I went too far by blowing up at him. But in the moment, it just felt impossible to hold back anymore. That's where this story ends. That kind of family drama hits harder when you're the one stuck carrying the responsibility. It sounds like the brother just doesn't realize how much he benefits from all the stuff he doesn't pay for. I can see why the yelling happened, especially after being run down from school and work. Sometimes people only notice what they're missing when it's taken away, and internet is definitely one of those things. This next story is about a tenant dealing with an absolutely ruthless landlord who pushed things way too far. For 3 years, I had to deal with a landlord who was hands down one of the worst people I've ever met. Honestly, calling him a decent human being would have been a stretch. Just to give you an idea of what I went through, he stole my dryer and other household items from a common area. He made me pay out of pocket for a plumbing repair that was clearly just normal wear and tear. He even tried breaking into my house. And when I finally involved a lawyer after he harassed me about a parking spot, he retaliated by trying to raise my rent another $150 a month. Now here's the thing. I was never late on rent, not once in 3 years. The only exception was the month after he forced me to cover that plumbing repair. Because of that expense, I ended up a couple of days behind. That was the only time. And the place itself? It wasn't even worth half the trouble. The plumbing turned out to be completely illegal. The porch was falling apart and dangerous. Left that way for years. The ceiling paint kept flaking down. The gas heater wasn't up to code. Basically, everything about the apartment screamed unsafe and neglected. My chance to finally escape came when he tried to raise my rent by $500 a month. That was it for me. So 4 days before I officially left, I called the building inspector. I laid it all out. The unsafe porch, the unpermitted replacement he slapped together, the plumbing, the heater, and more. The inspector came out the very next day, and I watched him measure things and take notes. Each violation meant a $500 daily fine until fixed. I don't know exactly what happened after, but knowing he was finally on the town's radar felt amazing. A week before I moved out, he tried demanding I leave at a specific time, which legally wasn't how things worked where I lived. He even threatened to call the police on me. Instead of letting him control the situation, I went to the police that morning myself and gave them a heads up. Sure enough, he came by, harassed me, and threatened me again. I called the police and they told him straight up that I was in the right. Later that same day, while I was moving stuff into storage, he broke into my apartment. I came back to find my door literally nailed shut. At that point, I called the police again and asked for a supervisor because I was beyond tired of his harassment. He took off before the supervisor showed up, probably because he knew he'd be arrested. In the end, I filed a report, and the police hit him with a felony charge for breaking and entering. Between the fines and the charge, it was finally some real consequences for the way he treated his tenants. That's the end of this story. What stands out to me here is just how relentless this landlord was. It's wild that someone would go that far just to squeeze money out of tenants. The part that really stuck with me was him breaking in and literally nailing the door shut. That's next level unhinged. At least the tenant finally got some peace knowing the law caught up to him. This next story is about a server who was stunned when a customer yanked her by the hair just to admire her handmade jewelry. I still can't believe what happened today. I'm not even that upset about it, more just shocked at how bold some people can be. To give you some background, I make jewelry as a hobby. I've gotten into silversmithing, and last week I made myself a pair of sterling braid bands. They're simple, but they have this shiny, elegant look to them that I love. Since I wear my hair in 2 braids a lot, I thought it would be fun to slip them in just to jazz things up a little. And honestly, they've been a huge hit. All week long at work, I've gotten so many compliments and questions. Guests have asked if I bought them, and I've been able to smile and say, "Nope, I made them." That's been fun. It feels nice to have people appreciate something I created with my own hands. So today I was working a shift at the restaurant. Nothing unusual. I went to seat a family of 4. Everything seemed normal at first, though I did notice one of them was actually a former server from our restaurant. That stood out to me because usually when people come back who used to work there, they act really friendly and respectful toward the staff since they've been in our shoes. But apparently that standard didn't apply to their mom. I led them over to the table, set down the menus, and turned to head back to the front. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, as I was mid-step, I suddenly felt a sharp tug on my hair. Not just a little brush or a light grab, but a full-on yank. The mom had reached right over my shoulder and snatched my braid in her hand. She pulled so hard she literally spun me back around to face her. I was stunned. For a second, I didn't even know what was happening. One moment I was walking away. The next moment I was being held by the hair like some kind of puppet. My body jolted with the pull, and I turned back around to see her holding onto my braid with this big smile, completely unbothered by the fact that she had just grabbed me like that. And then she started asking about my jewelry. No apology, no hesitation, just holding my braid hostage while peppering me with questions. She twisted the braid around in her hand so she could get a better look at the braid bands, showing them off to her family like I was some kind of display stand. She kept saying things like, "Look, isn't this so cool? She made these herself." The whole time she was still holding my hair, not letting go, not realizing how incredibly awkward it was, just turning my braid this way and that, like she was inspecting merchandise in a store. I tried to keep a polite face, but inside I was completely floored. Who does that? I don't even mind people being curious about my jewelry. In fact, I love when people ask about it. But there's such a difference between asking politely and literally yanking me backward mid-step to get a closer look. It would have been different if I'd been standing in front of her already, talking, and she had reached out to lightly touch it after asking permission. That would have been forward, but at least understandable. But this was like I wasn't even a person. Eventually, she did let go, still gushing about how much she liked the braid bands. I walked away trying to process the whole thing, half laughing in disbelief and half annoyed. I mean, yes, she was very sweet about the jewelry itself. She complimented me a lot, and I could tell she genuinely thought it was cool that I had made them myself. But the way she went about it was completely out of line. I literally felt like a hostage to my own hair. Even now, I can't get over how surreal it felt. A grown adult grabbing me by the braid and holding me there like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't malicious, but it was so wildly inappropriate. I don't think I'll ever forget it. That story stops there. That's such a wild move for someone to pull on another person's hair like that. The jewelry part is cool, but the way she went about it is just so over the line. It's almost funny how casual she was while basically holding someone hostage. People really do surprise you in the weirdest ways sometimes. This next story is about someone who set out to cook a healthy homemade dinner, but completely ruined it after zoning out on their phone. Last night, I made what I thought was going to be a solid, grown-up decision. Instead of going with my usual fallback of ordering takeout or throwing together something lazy, I actually decided to cook a proper meal. I had chicken thawed, I had veggies ready, and I figured it would be simple. Just season everything, pop it in the oven, and in about half an hour, I'd be sitting down with something warm, tasty, and homemade. So I got everything prepped. I chopped up the vegetables, tossed them in some oil, added a little seasoning, and spread them out on the tray. The chicken was already marinated, so I placed it right alongside the veggies. It looked pretty good going in. Colorful, neat, like the kind of dinner you'd see in a meal prep post. I set the oven to the right temperature, slid the tray in, and hit the timer. I even felt a little proud of myself. This was adulting at its finest. The plan was simple. Wait it out, let the oven do its magic, and enjoy the results. But then I made the mistake that I think so many of us make. I sat down on the couch. At first it was harmless. I told myself I'd just sit for a couple of minutes while the food cooked. Maybe scroll through my phone, check a few messages, watch a short video or two. Nothing major, nothing distracting, just something to pass the time. But once I started scrolling, I completely lost track of reality. My brain shifted into autopilot. The food in the oven? Totally forgotten. The timer? I'm pretty sure it went off. But in my haze of swiping and laughing at random videos, I didn't even register it. Minutes turned into who knows how long. I was sucked so deep into the endless cycle of posts and clips that by the time I finally glanced up, it was because something smelled off. Not the warm, savory smell of roasted chicken I'd been expecting, but something sharp and bitter creeping into the air. That's when the dread hit. I shot up off the couch, phone still in my hand, and bolted to the kitchen. The second I opened the oven, I knew the damage was beyond repair. The veggies were no longer food. They were blackened sticks of charcoal. What had once been bright carrots, zucchini, and peppers now looked like they belonged in a campfire. The chicken wasn't much better. Instead of being golden and juicy, it was hard, dry, and dark enough to pass for a hockey puck. The heat hit me in the face when I opened the oven door, and the smell punched even harder. It wasn't just burnt. It was that deep, acrid, smoky smell that clings to everything. The smoke alarm hadn't gone off yet, but it was seconds away from blaring. I waved my hand around like that would do anything, coughing a little, just staring at the wreck of what was supposed to be dinner. I stood there for a moment in disbelief. Like maybe if I blinked hard enough, it would somehow reset itself and my food would magically reappear perfectly roasted. But no, I had destroyed it completely. Dinner plans shifted instantly from healthy and homemade to whatever I could throw together in desperation. I ended up pouring myself a bowl of cereal. There I was, sitting at the table, spooning cereal into my mouth, while staring at the blackened tray in the sink like it had personally betrayed me. Honestly, the worst part wasn't even eating cereal instead of chicken and veggies. The real punishment was the cleanup. That tray looked like it had been through a fire. The food had baked itself into the metal, clinging on like it never planned to let go. I soaked it in hot water, scrubbed at it with a sponge, scraped it with a spatula. Nothing worked quickly. Every scrape sounded like nails on metal, and the black bits just smeared instead of coming off. It was like the pan itself was punishing me for daring to forget about it. I spent longer cleaning up than I'd actually spent prepping the food in the first place. By the time I finally got most of the burnt bits off, I was exhausted and annoyed. My apartment still smelled faintly of smoke, my dinner was gone, and the only thing I had to show for my responsible adult decision was a sink full of suds and a half-empty cereal box. Looking back on it now, it's kind of funny in that facepalm sort of way. It's such a classic mistake, thinking you can just check your phone for a minute and then losing an entire evening to it. I definitely learned my lesson. If I'm putting something in the oven, I either need to stay in the kitchen or set a backup alarm that's impossible to ignore. Because clearly, I cannot trust myself to keep track of time when there's a couch and a phone involved. That's the end of this story. That's one of those little life fails that feels brutal in the moment, but hilarious later. The cereal detail really seals it as a downgrade dinner. I think everyone's had some version of this happen, even if not that bad. It's the kind of story you laugh about after the smell finally clears out. This next story is about a landlord dealing with tenants who stopped paying rent, broke their agreement, and thought they could get away without consequences. So my dad owns a house that he's been renting out for a while. For the most part, the tenants who lived there were decent people. He trusted them, and things usually went smoothly. But then came this one family that changed everything. At first it seemed fine, but about 2 months into their tenancy, they flat out refused to pay rent. My dad tried to be understanding. He gave them another month to catch up, hoping they'd do the right thing. They didn't pay a cent. By that point, my dad was frustrated. He was already 2 months short on rent, and he just wanted to move on. So he offered them a deal. Leave the house as soon as possible, and instead of paying the full amount, they'd only need to cover half of what they owed. They came back with a counteroffer. They move out, leave the house clean, and keep all their furniture behind as compensation. Tired of the back and forth, my dad agreed. But when he got to the house, it was a completely different story. The place was a mess. There wasn't a single piece of furniture left behind, not even the ones that belonged to my dad. He had 2 sofas in the house before they moved in, and those were shoved out into the shed, trashed, and unusable. When he confronted them about it, asking for payment to cover the value of the furniture, they gave him empty promises. They said they'd pay in 2 weeks, but when he pushed for something sooner, they mocked him. They literally told him, "Good luck getting your money," and even sent laughing emojis afterward. That was the last straw. Now, here's the part they didn't think through. My dad knew that the tenant was a pastor at a church, and his son also worked there in some capacity. So my dad decided to contact the church directly. He explained everything, how they hadn't paid rent, how they'd trashed the place, and how they'd stolen furniture. The church took notice, and it definitely didn't look good for them. The very next day, my dad got a furious phone call from the tenant's son. He cursed at him, demanded to know why he had contacted the church, and said it was unfair. My dad just hung up, but the guy kept calling over and over, about 10 times in a row, desperate to change the situation. From what we gathered later, the church gave them a harsh ultimatum. Either settle things with my dad, or both the pastor and his son were going to lose their positions. That same day, my dad got the full payment for the furniture. He agreed to back off, satisfied that they had finally been forced to take responsibility. Looking back, my dad said it wasn't even about the money. It was about the disrespect. He was a Christian himself, and to see someone who preached values like honesty and integrity act that way, it really disappointed him. That's where the story ends. What stands out to me is how quickly everything flipped once the church got involved. The tenants brushed off every chance to make it right, but the second their reputation and jobs were on the line, they paid up immediately. The part that stuck with me was those mocking messages, thinking they could laugh it off, and then having it all come back around on them. It's wild how fast things unraveled once accountability hit. This next story is about a massage therapist whose friend kept demanding free sessions, leading to a clash over boundaries and respect for her work. I'm 24 and I work as a professional massage therapist. It's not just a job for me. It's something I genuinely love and feel passionate about. Ever since I was in training, I knew I had found the career I wanted. There's something deeply satisfying about helping people feel better, whether it's easing their stress after a long week or working out that one knot in their shoulder that's been bothering them for months. To me, it feels like solving a puzzle. Everybody is different. Every client carries their stress in unique ways, and figuring out how to help them walk out lighter and more relaxed is like a challenge I enjoy every day. And the best part is when I see their smile at the end of a session. That feeling, knowing I had a direct hand in improving their day, never gets old. For years, I worked in spas, learning the ins and outs of the industry. I picked up techniques, built experience, and saved money with the dream of one day having my own business. And eventually, I made it happen. I converted part of my home into a small studio space. It's not huge, but it's cozy, professional, and it feels like me. I decorated it carefully, got the right equipment, invested in good oils and linens, and slowly started building my client list. I still do outcalls sometimes, but having my own space where people can come to me has been amazing. I'm really proud of what I've created. It wasn't handed to me, and it wasn't easy. It's taken years of work, dedication, and a lot of trial and error to make it sustainable. This business isn't just something I do on the side. It's my livelihood. Now, one of my friends, she's 30, has always known how much I care about my work. From the beginning, she's told me she admires the fact that I followed my passion. She's seen me put in the hours and even celebrated with me when I opened my home studio. At least that's what it seemed like. But lately, things have taken a turn. Over the past few months, she's been texting me almost weekly, asking if she can come over for a massage. Not a scheduled appointment, not even framed as a favor with a trade in mind. Just a casual, "Hey, I'm stressed, can I swing by for a quick session?" The thing is, there's no such thing as a quick massage. Even if I only work on someone for 20 or 30 minutes, it's still a whole process. I have to set up my table, get my oils ready, make sure the space is clean, and then when it's over, I have to sanitize everything, wash up, and put everything back in order. That takes time and it interrupts my day completely. And every single time, she never offers to pay, not even just to cover supplies. At first, I brushed it off. I figured maybe she just didn't realize how much it takes out of me. Or maybe she thought of it as a casual favor between friends. But the more often it happened, the more it started to weigh on me. It's not just the physical effort, it's the fact that she always asks last minute, which makes it disruptive. Sometimes I'm preparing for paying clients, and her request throws me off track. Other times I've already had a full day, and her asking for me to do more feels exhausting. I've tried hinting that I'm busy, telling her gently that I can't, but she doesn't take no seriously. She just laughs it off or says, "Oh, come on, it's quick," like it's no big deal. Last week was the tipping point. I had a completely packed day. I was juggling back-to-back sessions and had an outcall scheduled later in the evening. In the middle of all this, she texted asking if I could squeeze her in for another quick massage. For once, instead of dodging, I said no directly. I told her I couldn't do it. She did not take that well. She snapped back that I cherish money so much, and that if I really loved what I did, I'd help my friends out instead of treating everything like a business transaction. She basically said that because I enjoy massage therapy, I should want to do it for free. That hurt. I love what I do, yes, but that doesn't mean it's just a fun little hobby. It's my job. It's how I pay my bills and keep a roof over my head. Just because I'm passionate about it doesn't mean it's free. I explained that to her as calmly as I could, saying this is my livelihood and I need to have boundaries. Instead of understanding, she got angry. Now she's been talking to our mutual friends, saying I've turned cold, that I don't care about people anymore, and that I'm putting money before friendship. Hearing that made me feel guilty, because part of me worries maybe I am being too harsh. But then I think about how drained I feel after constantly giving my time away for free, and I realize I can't keep doing it. Massage therapy takes real energy. My body is my tool, and when I overextend myself, I don't just get tired. I risk injuring myself and not being able to work. My paying clients respect that and value my time. It's unfair to them if I keep giving sessions away for nothing, just because a friend demands it. I never wanted to get to this point, but I can't keep letting her treat my work like it's some casual thing she's entitled to. I'm left feeling torn, guilty for upsetting her, but also firm in knowing I need to protect my career and my boundaries. That's where the story ends. That's rough because it really shows how some people can undervalue your work just because they see it as something you enjoy. The friend acting like money was the only reason is kind of unfair, especially when it's clearly about respect. It's interesting how boundaries can test a friendship like that. Honestly, it makes me think about how important it is for people to see passion-driven work as real work. This next story is about an overworked IT employee who asked for fair pay, got denied, and decided to hit back in a way that cost his company far more than they expected. I first heard this story from a friend, but it was actually his brother's experience. For the sake of telling it, let's call him Bob. Bob had been into computers since he was a kid, and by the time this all happened, he knew his way around IT pretty well. Like a lot of people in that field, he'd bounce between jobs, eventually landing at a service and distribution company in Ontario, Canada. At that company, there were only 2 IT employees, Bob and one other guy. A few years back, the company decided it was time to modernize their whole setup. They had all these separate programs for dispatching, inventory, payroll, and finances, and it was a mess trying to move information between them. Bob suggested an ERP program he knew well from a previous job. For anyone unfamiliar, an ERP, or Enterprise Resource Planning System, is basically an all-in-one program. It handles purchase orders, sales, inventory, HR, vendor details, and customer records. You can run detailed reports, figure out which customers bought the most of a certain product, see which employees are improving the most, or check which vendors deliver the fastest. The company went with Bob's recommendation, and it became the backbone of everything they did. Every employee used it, though each only touched the parts relevant to their role. The receiver, for example, would log shipments and quantities without worrying about prices or vendors, while sales staff could instantly check inventory on hand. The rollout wasn't easy. Bob was run ragged getting everyone trained and making sure the system worked. But after a few months, it settled into place. He still handled tweaks and the usual IT issues, but overall the system ran smoothly. Then the company expanded into new time zones, and that's where the trouble really started. Orders and emails began showing up outside Ontario business hours, early from Atlantic Canada, late from the Pacific Coast. Staff stretched their days to keep up, coming in early and staying late. And of course, people expected Bob to be on call around the clock. He'd show up at 8 a.m. and get hit with complaints for not responding to requests that were sent before his shift even started. Then at night, his phone would ring during dinner, with people demanding help immediately. The company's solution was to stagger the IT shifts. Bob would start at 6 a.m. and finish at 2:30, while his colleague would work later hours. But his colleague had kids and refused. The company insisted anyway, so the colleague quit. That left Bob as the only IT guy. The company promised they'd find a replacement, but they were offering way below market pay for such a specialized position, so no one took it. Meanwhile, Bob shouldered all of it, training new hires, handling ERP issues, maintaining hardware, and putting out fires at all hours. He asked for a raise. Denied. He asked for overtime. They told him IT specialists were exempt under Ontario law. He looked it up, and unfortunately, they were right. Still, Bob had friends in the IT world, and knew the company wasn't going to find anyone willing to work for what they were offering. That gave him an idea. See, the ERP program logged every user's sign-in and sign-out times. Even if someone forgot to log out, the system would boot them after 15 minutes of inactivity. So Bob ran reports. He pulled data for every non-manager employee going back to the day the ERP went live, and the results showed clear overtime hours for nearly everyone. Here's the thing. Ontario labor law states that even salaried employees are entitled to overtime pay for anything over 44 hours a week, unless they're supervisors or managers. So Bob contacted an employment lawyer and confirmed everything. Then he lined up another job and prepared his exit. On his last day, after he left the company, every employee got an email. Attached was an Excel sheet with their logged hours, neatly showing how much overtime they had worked. The subject line read, "You're legally entitled to overtime pay." Inside the email was the lawyer's contact information. The fallout was immediate. Almost every employee authorized the lawyer to represent them, and the company suddenly found itself facing a massive bill for unpaid overtime. All they had to do was pay Bob fairly for the extra work he was doing. Instead, they ended up paying almost everyone in the building. That story wraps up here. What really stands out is how avoidable this was. The company thought they could save money by underpaying one guy, and it snowballed into a huge financial hit. The part that stuck with me was the email. Simple, direct, and absolutely devastating for the company. It's kind of wild how one overlooked detail, like the ERP system logging every single login, became the key to flipping the whole situation around. This next story is about an older sister who had to step up as a guardian and decided to cut off her younger brother's internet after he kept missing the school bus from staying up late gaming. I'm 30, and about a month ago my 14-year-old brother moved in with me. He'll be 15 soon, and honestly, This wasn't something I had planned for, but our parents got evicted. They're living in a rooming house right now because of all the poor decisions they've made, and since my brother needed somewhere more stable, he ended up with me. I live in an apartment with my boyfriend, and we made space for him to have his own room. My brother is a sweet kid at heart. He doesn't get into trouble, and he's not a bad kid by any means, but the way our mom raised him left him with almost no sense of responsibility. He doesn't really have hobbies outside of video games, and he plays them late into the night, sometimes yelling at his Xbox until 1 in the morning. His diet is about what you'd expect from a teenager who hasn't been taught better. Hot Pockets, pizza, ramen, repeat. He's kind and polite, but he's spoiled, and it shows. When he first moved in with me, he had to switch school districts, but the district ended up making an exception for him. They actually set up a bus route so he could still go to the high school he was originally supposed to attend. That was a blessing because the whole process took about 2 weeks, and I thought we finally had a system in place that would work. His first day on the new bus was last Friday. I had the day off, so I walked with him to the bus stop, which is about a 10-minute walk from my apartment. The pickup time is 6:45 in the morning, so I made it clear to him that he needed to be out the door by 6:30. That way he could walk without rushing and still be early enough not to miss it. That first day, everything went fine. Then came Monday. At 6:15, I noticed he wasn't even out of bed. I got him up, told him he needed to move, but he dragged his feet. By the time he finally pulled himself together, the bus had come and gone. He ended up staying home because neither I nor our mom could leave work to pick him up and drop him off. I told myself that accidents happen, so I let it slide with just a reminder that he needed to do better next time. He promised me he would. Well, this morning proved that promise didn't mean much. Again, at 6:15, he was still in bed. I told him clearly that he had better be up and ready to go by 6:30. I left my apartment around 6:32, glancing back at his room, and he still wasn't up. Later, when I asked him if he had made it, he claimed he left at 6:30, but the walk was longer than 10 minutes, and that's why he missed the bus. I know for a fact that wasn't true, because I checked the clock right before walking out. He wasn't even out of bed by then. At that point, I had to make a choice. I can't keep letting him miss school, especially if he's just going to stay home gaming all day. So before I left this morning, I actually took the router plug with me. I figured if he wasn't going to get himself up on time, then at the very least, he wasn't going to sit around and treat it like a free day off. I told him flat out that he wasn't going to be allowed on the internet tonight or tomorrow. On top of that, I made a new rule. Moving forward, I'll be shutting the internet off at 9:30 every night. That way he has no excuse to stay up until 1 in the morning yelling at his Xbox, and he might actually start getting the rest he needs. The thing is, I don't like being the bad guy here. I love my brother. I care about him deeply, but our parents didn't give him structure or discipline, and if no one steps up to do it now, I'm worried about where he'll end up later in life. I've been trying to help in other ways too. I cook real meals for him, kid-friendly things that aren't complicated, but he turns up his nose and sticks to the same frozen food and noodles. I've tried talking to him in a calm, supportive way, telling him that being an adult is hard, and that learning responsibility now will make things easier later. He just shrugs and says, "I know," but his actions show otherwise. That's where the guilt kicks in. I feel bad taking away something he loves, but at the same time, I know boundaries are necessary. I don't want to be just the mean big sister who yells and punishes, but I also can't let him think missing school is fine. He deserves better than what our parents gave him, and I'm trying to make sure he gets it. I just hope one day he understands why I'm doing it. That's where this story finishes. That's a heavy role to step into as a sibling, but it sounds like she's really trying to look out for him. Cutting the internet might feel harsh in the moment, but sometimes structure is the only thing that works. It's interesting how quickly guilt comes in, even when the choice makes sense. Honestly, it feels more like tough love than anything else. This next story is about a parent who fought back against a big retail company after hidden charges showed up on a Christmas gift order. This all happened around Christmas. My wife and I had ordered one of our son's Santa gifts from a big UK sports retail chain that also has stores here in Ireland. It was a football rebounder. Basically like a trampoline you kick a ball at and it bounces back to you. We bought it from their Irish website and didn't think twice about it. A few days later, we got a notification from a well-known courier company, the one with the brown uniforms, saying there were customs charges due. At first, we assumed it was a scam. We've bought plenty of things for the kids before, and everything we'd ordered had already arrived. But after double-checking and calling around, we found out it was actually our rebounder. The company had shipped it from the UK through a local carrier, and then onto the brown uniformed delivery guys. Now, here's the problem. Both my wife and I are on disability, so an extra €50 at Christmas was a big hit. But I told her to pay it for the sake of the gift, and I'd deal with the retailer afterward. That's when the runaround started. The first day, I called 3 separate times. Each time, I sat on hold for at least 20 minutes, only to be promised a manager would call me back. Nobody ever did. The second day was just as bad. By the third day, I was properly frustrated. I called again, waited even longer on hold, and finally told the rep I wasn't taking this any further unless something changed. All I wanted was the €50 back, because Irish consumer law clearly states that any additional charges have to be shown to the buyer before they complete the purchase. And I knew this wasn't the case because I tested it, went all the way through checkout again with the same item, and no notice of import fees popped up. The rep didn't really care, but tried to help. He offered me a €20 gift voucher, and then he read a statement saying they advise customers there may be DDU charges, delivery duty unpaid, on items shipped outside the UK. I asked him where exactly this information was shown. After a pause, he admitted he didn't know. That's when I told him they had one last chance. I said, "Have your manager call me within 60 minutes, or I'm going to post the entire situation on LinkedIn and tag every senior officer in your company." Then I hung up and waited. No call ever came. So the next day, I followed through. I posted the entire story on LinkedIn. How they'd stuck us with hidden charges, ignored our calls, and brushed us off. I tagged everyone I could, from regional managers to the European directors, all the way up to the CEO. And I called them out for doing this at Christmas, of all times. Not long after, I noticed they tried to take the rebounder listing off their website, as if they could erase the problem. But I knew better. If you searched rebounder on their site, it still showed up in the results, even though the page itself was missing. I took screenshots, then dug up a cached version of the page on Google from a couple of days before. I added all of that as a comment under my original post, pointing out how they were trying to cover it up. And of course, I tagged the senior officers again. The attention started rolling in. My post was gaining traction, and I noticed 3 people in incognito mode had viewed my profile. I had a good idea who that was. So naturally, I screenshotted that too and added it to the post, joking about how they were creeping on my profile but not addressing the problem. The very next morning, I got a call from a senior executive at their UK head office. Her tone was completely different. Apologies left and right, asking what she could do to make it right. I told her that originally, I only wanted my €50 back, since it was never disclosed at checkout. But because I had to go to such lengths just to get their attention, now I wanted more. I wanted my €50 back, a full refund for the entire order, and I wanted to keep the rebounder. She asked for a little time to sort it out, and within an hour she called back. She sent me the €50 through PayPal, refunded the whole purchase, and told me to keep the rebounder. I thanked her, but in my mind, I wasn't about to let anyone walk all over my family, no matter how big their company was. That's the end of this story. The part that really got me here was how quickly things changed once he went public. The company ignored calls for days, but the second their higher-ups were tagged online, they were scrambling to fix it. What stood out the most was the screenshots, catching them trying to quietly hide the listing and then blasting that back out for everyone to see. It's kind of wild how fast they went from brushing him off to refunding everything once their reputation was on the line. This next story is about someone who lost their temper during a heated argument with HR, quit on the spot, and is now torn between needing the money and wanting out of a toxic workplace. I'm a student, and on top of taking classes, I also work a full-time job. It's not because I want extra spending money or anything like that. It's because I pay for my own education, my rent, and all my bills. I've been financially independent since I was 18, and I've learned how to keep myself afloat without relying on anyone else. It's not easy, but I've managed it. Yesterday, though, everything kind of came to a head at work. It started with me overhearing HR arguing with some of my coworkers. The tone was sharp, and the energy in the room just felt heavy. I didn't think much of it at first. Arguments happen in workplaces. But a little later, HR called me into her office. I walked in, expecting maybe a quick question or clarification. Instead, she immediately started yelling at me. She accused me of coming in late, among other things, and the way she said it wasn't professional at all. It wasn't a calm conversation about attendance or performance, it was shouting. And after almost 3 years of working there and always holding myself together, I snapped. I shouted back. It got heated, fast. Both of us were raising our voices, throwing accusations and defenses back and forth. She wasn't just being strict, she was being disrespectful. She twisted my words, exaggerated small things, and made me feel like everything was my fault. Then she told me I needed to come in earlier the next day, earlier than my actual scheduled time, even though she knew I had 4 university classes stacked that day. That's when I lost it. I told her straight up, "I'm not coming. I want my salary, and I want to quit." Her response? She smirked and said, "You're not getting your salary. You can contact our lawyers." At that point, I was shaking with anger. My hands, my whole body. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me. I fired back that I didn't care and kept arguing. The auditor even stepped in, trying to calm things down. Another coworker tried too, but neither of us backed down. The fight dragged on for over 30 minutes, with her cutting me down, twisting things, and trying to make me feel guilty. It was manipulative. It was toxic. She kept acting like everything I'd ever done wrong, even the things that weren't actually my fault, were somehow proof that I was a problem. She made me feel small, like I didn't matter, even though I know how much I contribute to that place. Here's the thing. I wasn't just another employee sitting around doing the bare minimum. I was pulling the weight of 3 people. I've been overworked, underpaid, and taken for granted for way too long. So when she crossed that line, when she treated me with zero respect, I couldn't swallow it anymore. I quit. Now management is scrambling. They don't want me to leave. They've been sweet-talking me, trying to smooth things over. Even the same HR who was screaming at me turned around and tried to be nice later. It's almost laughable. They're panicking because they know I do so much more than my actual job description. They don't want to lose that. But I'm torn. On one hand, I feel proud of myself for standing up to her. I have too much pride to let anyone disrespect me like that, especially when I wasn't even in the wrong. I wasn't the one who caused her bad mood. She was already angry from earlier arguments, and she took it out on me. On the other hand, I desperately need this income. My education depends on it. My bills depend on it. Walking away from it would put me in a rough spot financially, even though it might save me some sanity. So here I am, caught between my pride and my reality. I still want to quit because the environment is toxic and the way I was treated was unacceptable. But I also need to think about survival. I don't know if I can keep putting myself through this just for the paycheck, but I also don't know how I'd keep my education going without it. That's where I stand now. Unsure if I should stick to my decision or try to hold out a little longer until I find something better. That story ends there. That's such a tough spot because pride and practicality can clash hard when money's involved. It's crazy how management only started valuing the work once the threat of losing it became real. That whole argument sounded exhausting, and it's no wonder the decision feels so heavy after. Sometimes the hardest part is figuring out whether walking away is strength or risk. This next story is about an office party fun thief who thought he could get away with it until some engineers turned his downfall into an unforgettable spectacle. My dad recently shared a story about my late Uncle Dale. He was a senior engineer at a small firm in the Midwest and also taught at the local community college. On top of that, he unofficially took charge of the company's office parties. To cover the costs, he kept a little tin donation box outside his office door. Everyone in the office knew about it, and most people happily tossed in cash whenever they could. One day, about a month before the big Christmas party, Uncle Dale decided to check the box. To his surprise, it was completely empty. That didn't make sense. He had seen colleagues drop money in more than once, which meant only one thing. Someone was stealing from the party fund. At that exact moment, Brad came around the corner. Brad was the boss's nephew and also an engineer at the firm. But unlike most of the staff, Brad was known for being obnoxious, entitled, and just plain rude. He had a reputation for skating by on his family connection, dodging accountability, and making everyone's life more difficult. The way Brad glanced at him in that moment made Uncle Dale suspicious. Instead of going straight to the boss, Uncle Dale decided to set a trap. Using his engineering know-how, he rigged a hidden doorbell camera by the donation box. Then he asked a colleague to loudly brag about dropping $100 into the fund. After that, it was just a matter of waiting. Not long after, his phone buzzed with a recording notification. He watched Brad open the box, scowl when he found it empty, and then throw it against the wall in frustration. Uncle Dale now had evidence, but rather than simply handing it over, he came up with something more creative. He went to his engineering students and offered extra credit to design a rigged donation box. The only requirement was that it had to make noise when opened, and the more obnoxious the sound, the better the bonus. The students loved the challenge. A week later, they returned with their creation. It looked ordinary from the outside, but inside was one of those musical card inserts programmed to blast a song as soon as the lid opened. And not just any song. They picked Let It Go from Frozen, which at that time had already started driving people crazy. To make it even worse, they glued the insert in place, angled it for a maximum volume, and designed the hinge so the song wouldn't stop unless you pressed a hidden button on the side. The next day, Uncle Dale loudly announced, "Well, isn't this nice? Someone donated $50 to the party fund." He placed the rig box back outside his office, then sat back to wait. Sure enough, the trap was sprung. Moments later, the entire office heard Idina Menzel's voice belting, "Let It Go," at full blast. Brad grunted and cursed under his breath, struggling to shut the box, but the song just kept playing. The sound drew a crowd, including his uncle, the company owner. In a fit of frustration, Brad hurled the box against the wall, leaving a dent for good measure. That was the last straw. His uncle called him into the office. 15 minutes later, Brad walked out with a cardboard box, clearing his desk for good. His personnel file was updated with a note, "Do not rehire, do not recommend." Just like that, his career in engineering was over. And to top it all off, at the Christmas party, Uncle Dale played a little video for everyone. It was the doorbell camera footage of Brad's failed attempt to steal from the fund, perfectly synced to the sound of Let It Go. That's where this story finishes. What stood out to me most was how Uncle Dale didn't just expose Brad. He turned it into a full-blown event. The students being part of the trap made it even better, like everyone got in on the joke. The idea of that song blasting nonstop in the office while Brad panicked is hilarious on its own, but the fact it led straight to him being fired makes it even more surreal. Honestly, that Christmas party must have been unforgettable. This next story is about a traveler who ended up at the wrong hotel and ran into a nightmare situation, only to be saved by a kind front desk worker who went above and beyond. So this happened when I was traveling and needed to stay at a hotel. I booked a room at one of the hotels in the Wyndham family. The problem was this wasn't a big city, but it still had 3 different hotels with the exact same name. You can probably already see where this was heading. I pulled up to the first hotel and confidently walked in, only to find out I was in the wrong place. Okay, fine. I drove to the second one, thinking that had to be it, but nope, wrong again. At that second hotel though, the woman working at the front desk was incredibly sweet. She asked to see my reservation, so I showed her my phone. She glanced at it, kind of blinked like she knew exactly what had happened, then gave me directions to the correct hotel. Before I left, she even told me, "Give me a call if you need any help." At the time, I didn't think much of it, but oh boy, I would be calling her later. When I finally made it to the third hotel, it turned out this was actually the one I had booked. I checked in without too much hassle, but immediately felt disappointed. They didn't have any first floor rooms available, and every room had exterior facing doors. For someone traveling alone, that already made me a little uneasy. Things only went downhill from there. As I walked around, I noticed kids running wild in the parking lot without supervision. Guests were smoking outside their rooms, and one woman had even strung up party lights over her door like she was setting up camp long term. When I took the stairs, they smelled like cat urine and dog waste. Here and there, you could catch the sour stench of beer and vomit. Still, I figured I'd give my room a chance. I unlocked the door, walked in, and immediately froze. The bed hadn't been made, towels were scattered across the floor, and it was clear no one had cleaned the place since the last guest left. Big nope. I marched straight back to the desk and asked for another room. The clerk didn't look surprised, just let out a small sigh and handed me keys to a different one. I walked down the hall, opened the door, and somehow it was worse. Food containers had been left on the desk, like someone had just eaten there and walked out. That was it for me. Double nope. I wasn't staying. At that point, I pulled out my phone and called the second hotel, the one with the kind front desk worker. She answered right away, and I asked if she still had any rooms available. She said yes, and even better, they had first-floor rooms. I told her I'd be there in 15 minutes, and just prayed I could get out of my current reservation without a fight. Back at the front desk of the Nightmare Hotel, I explained the situation. The clerk didn't argue. Honestly, it seemed like they knew I wasn't going to stay after seeing 2 dirty rooms. They canceled my reservation without giving me a hard time, which was a huge relief. So I drove straight back to the second hotel. I got there with just a minute to spare, joining the line of people checking in. When I reached the counter, I overheard the sweet lady at the desk telling the man ahead of me that they no longer had any first-floor rooms left. My heart sank. That was exactly what I had been hoping for. The man threw a tantrum right there in the lobby, frustrated about not getting the room he wanted. Then it was my turn. She looked up, smiled warmly, and said, "Welcome back," like I was an old friend she hadn't seen in years. I explained I'd overheard her tell the man ahead of me there weren't any first-floor rooms left, and I said a second-floor room would be fine if that was all she had. Before I could even finish, she cut me off with a grin and said, "Honey, I knew you were coming back. I got you." It turned out she had purposely held one aside for me. She knew about the reputation of that other hotel, but because the chain was shared, she wasn't allowed to warn me outright. When I left earlier, she had a feeling I'd be back, and she saved a safe room just in case. She told me she was especially worried because I was a small woman traveling alone, and she didn't want me stuck in a situation that felt unsafe. She had literally been waiting for me to call back. I never caught her name, but I think about her often. Her small act of kindness, saving that room, greeting me like she'd been expecting me, stuck with me. Whenever I see someone yelling at a service worker, I remember her and how much of a difference just a little bit of empathy can make. That's the end of this story. That's such a wholesome turnaround. The first hotel sounded like a nightmare, but that one worker completely changed the experience. It's cool how sometimes the smallest gestures end up making the biggest impression. Definitely makes you think twice about how much kindness matters in jobs like that. This next story is about a soldier overseas who discovered local cops were running a shady scheme with inspection stickers, only for it to backfire when passports got involved. A few years back, I was serving overseas with the US military, stationed in an area that wasn't exactly well off. There were plenty of panhandlers around, lots of petty crime, and just a general sense of people pulling whatever schemes they could to get by. One of the common rackets going on there, and apparently in other parts of the country too, involved vehicle inspection stickers. The local cops would incentivize people to report cars that had out-of-date or fake stickers. To make it easier, they even gave some folks access to the inspection database so they could check plates on their own. And because fake or stolen stickers weren't unheard of, people used that excuse as cover. Here's how it usually worked. Someone would spot what they thought was an out-of-date sticker, jimmy the car door open, and clean out everything inside. Then they'd leave a note saying the items had been taken to the police station. When the owner showed up, the police would hit them with a fine for the expired sticker and give a deadline to get it fixed, or else another fine would follow. It was basically a cycle that kept money flowing to the local authorities. One morning, I walked out to my car and found one of those notes on my seat. It claimed my inspection sticker was fake, and all my belongings were at the police station. Not only was I now late for work, but my kid was going to be late for school too, since I had to drive her every morning. There wasn't a bus system where we were. The thing was, my inspection sticker was current. I just had the car inspected. And to make matters worse, I had made a dumb mistake the night before. I put all of our passports, mine, my wife's, and my kids, in the glove box because we were headed to the base to take care of some paperwork. My wife also needed to apply for a new passport since hers was expired. I figured if I set everything in the car early, I wouldn't forget it in the morning. Well, that backfired. At the police station, I asked what was going on. They looked through the documents and confirmed the car had a valid inspection. They apologized and said they'd return my stuff. But when I asked to file a theft report, they stared at me like I had 3 heads. In their minds, nothing had been stolen. Someone had just moved my things for me. Never mind that my car was broken into. That's when an idea hit me. This might sound a little shady, but it worked. I asked where my wife's passport was. They shrugged and said whatever was in the pile was all they had. I told them I needed an official police report because I had to contact the US Embassy about a stolen passport, and I made it clear that the embassy would want to know exactly who had taken it, since the person dropped everything off at that very station. I have never seen someone's attitude change so quickly. The officer suddenly looked nervous and tried to talk me out of filing the report, but I didn't back down. I filed it, then I went straight to the embassy and reported the passport stolen. I handed them the police report and all the details. The embassy took it seriously. They issued us a new passport free of charge, and from what I later heard, the person who broke into my car ended up getting arrested and fined. They were also facing extra charges for stealing foreign documents, which is no small deal. I would have loved to be there when the local cops showed up at his place to drag him in. I can't say I felt bad about it at all. Hopefully the guy learned his lesson, and thankfully I didn't have any more problems for the rest of my tour until I eventually PCS'd back home. That's where the story ends. The part that really stood out to me was how the whole scheme backfired just because passports were involved. It's almost funny how fast the police changed their tune once the embassy came into play. What also got me was how bold that setup was, breaking into cars, leaving notes, and acting like it was standard procedure. The payoff in the end was kind of satisfying though, knowing the guy who pulled it actually faced real consequences. This next story is about a woman whose parked car kept getting slammed by a stranger's door, and how she answered that carelessness with a quiet, perfectly measured bit of payback. I'm 24, and this happened on a totally normal afternoon. I'd finished a small workout, treadmill, a few sets for shoulders, some stretching, and walked into the lot feeling loose and clear. The sun sat low enough to lay long shadows between cars. Doors thudded, engines rolled over, and somewhere a shopping cart rattled across a seam of concrete. I slid into my car, tossed my bag to the passenger seat, and called my boyfriend to debrief the gym in that easy post-workout way. While we talked, a big pickup nosed into the slot to my left. Tight spaces are the rule at this gym, so I didn't look twice. I kept chatting, fingertip idly circling the rim of the steering wheel. Then came a hard, hollow thunk. I flinched. His door edge was pressed against mine. I told myself it was an accident. Narrow bays, heavy doors, been there. I let my shoulders drop and kept talking. Thunk. Louder. Then again. Thunk. He leaned in for a gym bag, a shaker, a towel, earbuds. Each reach sent the door into my paint like a metronome. I went silent mid-sentence. He's hitting my car, I murmured to my boyfriend, keeping my voice low like that could teach courtesy through osmosis. No glance, no wince, no my bad. Just more thunks. When he finally shut the door and walked away, I climbed out to look. A chalky arc had bloomed on my door where his edge had kissed it. I rubbed with my sleeve. Some lifted, some stayed like a thin white comma. I stood there with one hand on my hip and ran the options. Leave a note, wait him out, ask the desk to page him. None of those felt like they would give me what I wanted, which, if I was honest, wasn't vengeance. It was balance. My boyfriend said, "Do what makes you feel settled." I liked that word. I looked at the truck again. Clean enough, not precious. Work boots on the floor, a coil of straps behind the seat, a film of dust on the side panel, and right where our doors met, he already had a pale scrape, soft and thumb-sized, as if this were a habit with a history. I opened my door slowly and leaned in to move my water bottle and adjust my bag. Then I let the door float outward along the same lazy arc his had traced and, tap, let it rest against his. Not a swing, not a show, just physics and a small correction. When I checked, his old scuff now had a twin. On my car, the smear looked like something a proper cloth could finish erasing. The math felt tidy. His disregard returned at the same volume. I waited a beat, listening to my body for that spike of guilt that sometimes follows a firm line. It didn't show. What arrived felt closer to relief, the kind you get after straightening a picture frame that's been crooked all week. I took a photo of the scuff on my door for reference, wiped once more with a napkin from the console, and let the rest be. I could have marched inside and built a speech. I could have asked a manager to pull cameras, turned a parking lot moment into a courtroom. None of that sounded like me, or like peace. Back in the driver's seat, I told my boyfriend what I'd done. He laughed and called it petty. I said, measured. And that made us both smile. That word fit even better than settled. Before pulling out, I sat for a minute with the air on low and let the ordinary life of the lot wash past. Footsteps, a trunk closing, two kids arguing about whose turn it was to pick the playlist. I realized the thing that had upset me most wasn't the scuff. It was the sound of indifference. That dull, hollow thunk carries a personality. It says, "I'm the only person here, even when the space is crowded." It's amazing how quickly that sound can make you feel like a ghost inside your own car. I eased into gear and rolled toward the exit. The gym shrank in the rear view, and the tight place inside my chest loosened. My boyfriend asked if I felt better. I told him I felt done. Not triumphant, not guilty, just finished. That felt like the correct shape. At the light, I pictured the guy coming back later, never noticing anything except his key in the lock. Maybe he'll live like that forever, skating past the edges of other people's things. Maybe one day he'll hear a familiar thunk and finally flinch. Either way, I didn't need to be there when whatever lesson finds him finally arrives. At home, I parked in my usual spot, popped the trunk, and pulled a small microfiber cloth from the bin I keep for road dust and coffee drips. A few patient circles took the white haze off my paint. I had to tilt the door just so to see the last ghost of it. Then even that was gone. The feeling was nice. Not winning, just restoring. Inside, I dropped my shaker bottle in the sink and texted my boyfriend a photo of my very ordinary, very fine door. "Peace restored," I wrote. He sent back a thumbs up and, because he can't help himself, a line about my door earning a black belt in boundaries. I laughed and let the day move on. Looking back, I'm surprised by how small the act was compared to how much calmer I felt afterward. It reminded me that matching someone's energy doesn't always mean matching their volume. Sometimes it means choosing the same scale, small, and using it with intent. A tiny answer to a tiny harm. No speech, no scene. Just a mirror held steady for 1 second longer than usual. That's all it was. A parking lot, a careless door, and a quiet reply that let me drive home as the version of myself I like best. That's the end of this story. The restraint here is kind of the highlight. It shows how a small, steady response can feel better than a blow up in the lobby. I like the line about straightening a crooked frame. Simple and clear. Little choices like that set the tone for the rest of the day. This next story is about someone who blamed their dad for bathroom puddles, only to later find out it was a serious plumbing problem that flooded the whole house. A couple of weeks ago, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom. It was one of those times where you're still half asleep, groggy, and just stumbling your way through the dark trying not to bump into walls. I made it to the upstairs bathroom, opened the door, and patted in. That's when I felt it. My foot landed squarely in something wet. I froze, looked down, and realized I had stepped into a puddle right next to the toilet. At first I didn't think too hard about it. The bathroom light wasn't even on yet, but when I turned it on, the shine off the tile confirmed what I thought. A little puddle of liquid. My brain immediately jumped to the obvious conclusion. It must be pee. And I knew who the culprit had to be. The only person who had been in the bathroom before me was my dad. In my sleepy, irritated state, that was all the evidence I needed. I was grossed out and frustrated. Who wants to walk into that in the middle of the night? So, after using the toilet myself, I decided I wasn't just going to let it slide. I grabbed a piece of paper, wrote out a little note calling my dad out, and taped it right to the bathroom door. It was written in that half-sarcastic, half-serious way. Something like, "Hey dad, please aim better or clean up after yourself." Then I went back to bed, satisfied that I had done my part in pointing out the issue. The next morning, my parents saw the note. Instead of being embarrassed or taking it seriously, they thought it was hilarious. They laughed about it, teased each other, and decided to just leave the note taped up. So now, instead of being a one-off message, it became this running joke. Every time anyone walked down the hall, they'd see the note hanging on the bathroom door. But the puddles didn't stop. Every now and then, I'd step into the bathroom and notice another little spot of liquid on the floor near the toilet. Each time, my annoyance grew. I kept thinking, why can't my dad just be more careful? My parents still thought the whole thing was funny, brushing it off as some silly household quirk. Meanwhile, I was the one silently fuming. Weeks passed like this. The note stayed on the door, almost like a decoration. My parents joked about it. I stayed irritated. And all the while, those little puddles kept showing up, one after another. Then one morning at 5 a.m., everything came to a head. My mom shook me awake, panicked. She said the upstairs bathroom was flooding and she needed my help right away. I jumped out of bed and ran down the hall. And what I saw stopped me in my tracks. The floor was covered with water. Not just a puddle this time, but an entire thin layer spreading across the tiles. It was everywhere, glistening in the early light. We rushed to figure out what was happening, and that's when we realized it. The pipe connected to the toilet had burst. Water was pouring out fast, soaking everything. The puddle wasn't just a random accident anymore. It was a full-on flood. And it wasn't contained to the bathroom either. The water was spreading so quickly that it started seeping through the floorboards, dripping down into the first floor. Before long, it even reached the basement. The whole family scrambled into action. We grabbed towels, buckets, mops, anything we could use to stop the water. My mom was practically in tears. My dad was barking out instructions, and I was running back and forth trying to help contain the damage. It felt chaotic, like we were fighting a losing battle against the water. Every time we thought we were making progress, more water seemed to appear. We spent the entire day cleaning, drying, and trying to get the pipes fixed. It wasn't just about stopping the water. It was about preventing long-term damage to the house. The carpets downstairs were damp. The basement had puddles forming, and we were exhausted. At some point, while I was wringing out yet another soaked towel, it all clicked in my head. Those puddles I had been blaming on my dad for weeks, they weren't pee at all. They had been toilet water, slowly leaking from the pipe as it got weaker and weaker until it finally gave out completely. I couldn't believe it. I had spent weeks annoyed at my dad, convinced he was being careless, even going so far as to make a whole note and tape it to the bathroom door. My parents thought it was funny, and we all ignored the actual signs that something was seriously wrong. Looking back now, it feels so obvious. A mysterious puddle near the toilet? Of course it could have been a leak, but in the moment, it just seemed easier to assume the worst. I couldn't help but laugh at myself once the dust settled. I mean, what a ridiculous misunderstanding. Instead of solving the problem early on, I had literally taped up a note accusing my dad, turning it into a running family joke, while the real issue, the failing pipe, was ignored. And because of that, we ended up with water damage across 3 levels of the house. It was a full-on plumbing disaster disguised as a silly household annoyance, and all because I stepped in a little puddle one night and jumped to the wrong conclusion. That's the end of this story. The way that note stayed on the door while the real issue was getting worse is actually pretty hilarious in hindsight. It's the perfect example of how families can turn something serious into a running joke without realizing it. The 5 a.m. wake-up call must have been brutal, but it does make for a story they'll probably never forget. Sometimes it's the smallest, funniest misunderstandings that set the stage for the biggest messes. This next story is about a hotel front desk worker who dealt with a guest asking for an unusually large amount of towels, leading to an awkward confrontation. When I clocked in for my usual 3 to 11 shift at the hotel, I was expecting a slower evening. We had just come off a busy weekend, so I figured this was the perfect chance to catch up on front desk projects. At first, everything seemed calm, but then I checked the pass-down log from the earlier shift. That's when I noticed a note about one particular guest. He had checked in early, and the staff described him as a little odd. Nothing major, just different. But what caught my eye was his request. He had already asked for 5 extra towel sets and extra bed sheets, on top of the 2 towel sets that automatically come with the room. He was staying only one night, and he was by himself. That kind of request gets logged because it impacts housekeeping inventory. Towels, sheets, and linens are part of what we track carefully. The night went on, and I didn't see him for hours. Then, later in the evening, he rolled in with a little wagon packed with his belongings. He stopped at the desk and, sure enough, asked for more. This time it was 3 more sets of towels, extra pillows, and pillowcases. At this point, my curiosity got the better of me. I tried to stay professional, but before I could stop myself, I asked, "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, why do you need so many towels?" The words were out of my mouth before I could pull them back. His reaction was immediate. He looked offended and snapped, "That's none of your business. I've never stayed in a hotel that asked why I needed towels." I understood his point, but the situation was still odd. According to our log, he had already received 5 extra towel sets at check-in. His room came with 2 sets by default. Now he wanted 3 more. That meant 10 entire towel sets, plus extra sheets, all for a single night stay in a room with 1 king bed. I tried to explain myself, but he cut me off again. He said, "My wife is flying in at midnight, so it's going to be 2 of us. Why does the front desk gossip about guests who ask for things?" I told him that we're not gossiping. We literally have to communicate things between shifts. It's part of our job to note unusual requests so that housekeeping and management know what's going on. But he didn't want to hear it. He raised his voice and said, "Well, for your information, my wife and I are germaphobes. We don't like being in rooms where other people have been. I need these towels to spread on the chairs and the floor so our skin doesn't touch any surface. And you don't need to ask me why I need towels. This is ridiculous." I paused for a moment, trying to decide how to respond. Then I said carefully, "Well, I asked because sometimes if guests need that many towels, it could mean there's an issue in the room, like a wet carpet or a leak that we need to know about. And respectfully, I've just never seen someone request 10 full sets of towels for a single night." That didn't calm him down. He immediately fired back, "Is there a limit or policy on asking for towels?" I answered honestly, "No, there isn't a limit." But I added, "There's a point where it becomes, well," before I could finish my thought, he cut me off again. "Are you accusing me of trying to steal them?" I shook my head and said, "No, sir. I'm not accusing you of that. I was just trying to figure out if there was a specific need, like a leak in your room." At that point, I realized the conversation wasn't going anywhere productive. He wasn't going to be satisfied with my explanation, and I probably should have kept my question to myself in the first place. I gave him what he asked for and let him head back to his room. Later on, I kept thinking about the exchange. If this were one of those AITA type of situations, I'd probably say ESH. He was over the top in how he reacted, but I was also out of line for letting my curiosity slip out when I should have stayed neutral. As front desk agents, our job is to provide service and keep things professional, even when guests' requests seem unusual. Still, it's hard not to feel for housekeeping in situations like this. 10 full towel sets and extra linens for one night means a mountain of laundry for them, especially when we've already been coming off a busy weekend. And part of me wonders if all that linen will even come back, or if some of it will just disappear, which only makes things harder for everyone else. The truth is, I don't think there's a strict policy in most hotels about the maximum number of towels. But there's definitely a line where the request goes from reasonable to excessive, and this one, in my mind, crossed that line. That story wraps up here. That one was interesting because it shows how a simple question can spark a whole argument. You could tell the guest was defensive, but at the same time the worker's curiosity slipped through in a way that probably didn't help. The part that stood out most was just how extreme 10 towel sets sounded for a single night. It makes you realize how front desk staff sees some pretty wild requests that most of us never think about. This next story is about a woman whose boyfriend dismissed her school bus driving job as beneath him, sparking a fight that revealed how little respect he really had for her work. I'm 36, and my life is a mix of 2 jobs. My main job is driving a school bus for elementary school kids. On the side, I work as a freelance graphic designer. It's not glamorous, but the combination works for me. The bus driving gives me stability, steady paychecks, benefits, and a schedule I can rely on. The design work gives me a creative outlet and freedom. It's not the type of setup everyone dreams of, but I've found a balance I'm happy with. This past weekend, I stayed over at my boyfriend's place. We've been together for about 8 months, and things have been going pretty smoothly. We were hanging out, just enjoying a normal morning, when the conversation shifted toward jobs. That's when things started to unravel. He asked me about my work, and I explained the usual, how I split my time between the bus and design projects. I thought it was a casual conversation, but out of nowhere, he looked at me and said I was too smart to be wasting my life driving a bus. Then he followed it up with something that stung even more. "Anyone can do that job. If you want me to take you seriously, you should quit and just focus on design." Hearing that hit me like a punch to the gut. It's one of those moments where you feel yourself go still, like your brain is double-checking if you heard correctly. He was basically telling me that my job, something I take seriously, something that's important to a lot of people, made me less than in his eyes. The thing is, people love to act like school bus driving is just turning a wheel, like all I do is sit and roll forward, but it's not like that at all. I wake up before the sun comes up, when most people are still in bed. I do full safety checks on a massive vehicle that carries 40 kids. I have to be alert every single second, because if I mess up once, people could get hurt. I deal with traffic, with kids yelling in the back seats, with parents waving me down, with weather that makes the roads slippery and unpredictable. It's not glamorous, but it's a huge responsibility. And if I'm being honest, it's not something just anyone can step into. I tried to explain all of that to him calmly. I wanted him to understand that what I do matters. But instead of listening, he laughed. He actually laughed in my face and said, "You make it sound like you're flying a plane. You're just driving around in circles, babysitting kids." That was the moment I lost it. Something in me snapped because it wasn't just disrespectful. It was dismissive in the cruelest way. I told him he had no right to belittle me or my work. He brushed me off, saying I was being dramatic and too proud for just being a driver. I didn't stick around after that. I packed my things right then and there. It was 7 in the morning on a Saturday, and I walked out of his house with my bag over my shoulder, furious and heartbroken at the same time. Since then, the whole thing has been replaying in my head. I thought he respected me. I thought he saw me as an equal partner, but now I know he sees me as less than because of a job title, and that's not something I can brush off. It keeps hitting me how entitled you have to be to look down on someone just because their job doesn't sound fancy enough. I keep thinking about the double standard of it all. He sits in an office all day, a safe, climate-controlled office where nothing dangerous happens if he loses focus for 5 seconds. Meanwhile, I'm out on the road before dawn, responsible for dozens of children's lives every time I turn the key. And yet somehow, in his mind, I'm the one who should feel embarrassed. That disconnect says more about him than it does about me. That story wraps up here. That one really shows how revealing people's attitudes toward work can be. It's crazy how quickly respect can vanish once someone thinks your job isn't good enough. What stuck out most was the pride she had in balancing 2 roles, stability and creativity, while he only saw status. It makes you appreciate how important it is to have people around you who value effort, not just titles. This next story is about a woman who pushed back after her husband agreed to let his mother stay with them for an entire month without asking her first. I've been married to my husband, Leo, for a while, and overall we have a good relationship with his mom. It's not that we don't get along with her, we do, but whenever she visits, she's the kind of guest who takes a lot of energy to host. Every summer, she comes to stay with us for 2 weeks. Those visits are long enough that by the time they're over, I'm ready to collapse and recharge. It's not that she's rude in an outright hostile way. It's more subtle than that. She critiques my cooking even when I make meals she seems to enjoy. She'll say things like, "Oh, I would have seasoned it this way," or "That's not how I usually prepare it," with this tone that makes me second guess myself. She also rearranges my kitchen, moves dishes, spices, even utensils. So I'll go to grab something in the middle of making dinner and find it in a completely different place. On top of that, she expects to be entertained constantly. If Leo and I just want to sit quietly and decompress, she'll nudge us toward an activity or act disappointed that we're not keeping her busy. 2 weeks of that is already a lot. By the end of her usual visits, I feel drained. But I've always handled it, because I do want to be respectful of family and keep things peaceful. This year, though, things shifted. Out of nowhere, Leo called me from work one day and casually mentioned that his mom was going to be staying with us for a full month this summer. Not 2 weeks, an entire month. The reason? She's having renovations done on her house, and apparently she asked if she could extend her stay. And without even checking with me, Leo told her yes. I just sat there with the phone in my hand, trying to process it. A whole month. My immediate reaction was, absolutely not. It wasn't just about the general stress of hosting her. It was also the fact that both of us work from home, and my office is in the guest room. If his mom stayed for a month, that meant I would lose my workspace for that entire time. I'd be displaced, scrambling for a quiet spot to get things done, all while managing the constant disruptions that come with having a high-maintenance guest in the house. So I told Leo straight up that it wasn't going to work. I said 2 weeks is the absolute limit, the same as always, and he should have talked to me first before agreeing to something that affects both of us. To make things easier, I even suggested a compromise. We could help his mom pay for a short-term rental nearby. That way she'd still have a place to stay, but I wouldn't lose my work routine or my privacy for an entire month. That's when things blew up. Leo was furious. He said I was being selfish and unsupportive of his family. He told me I was forcing him to go back on his word and essentially tell his mom she wasn't welcome in our home. He kept saying, "It's my house too. I should be able to host my own mother," and accused me of not caring about family or blowing her small inconveniences out of proportion. And I'll be honest, a part of me did feel guilty. She is family, and she genuinely does need a place to stay while her house is under construction. I don't want to come across as cold or heartless, especially since I know family means a lot to Leo. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized my feelings were valid. Hosting someone for 2 weeks is one thing. Hosting them for a full month while losing my workspace and my privacy is another. That's not a small inconvenience. That's a disruption to my life and livelihood. The truth is, I already bend a lot when she visits. I tolerate the kitchen critiques, the constant rearranging, and the subtle pressure to entertain. But a month of that, on top of being unable to properly work from home, that fills me with dread. I love Leo, but I need him to see that boundaries with family aren't about being selfish. They're about keeping our household balanced and livable for both of us. That's where this story ends. That's a tough spot because it shows how different people can be when it comes to defining family obligations. The husband clearly saw it as automatic, while she saw it as something that needed balance. The detail about her office being in the guest room made it clear this wasn't just about comfort, it was about her work being disrupted too. It really highlights how much damage skipping a simple conversation can cause. This next story is about a new restaurant host dealing with a server who kept demanding compensation whenever guests didn't want to sit in her section. I started working as a host at a chain restaurant about 2 months ago. It's my first time hosting, and I'll admit I was nervous at first, but now I feel like I've gotten the hang of things. The flow of seating, keeping the rotation fair, making sure guests are happy. It's a lot to juggle, but I've been managing. Still, there's this one section of the restaurant that constantly causes problems. To give you an idea, this section only has one booth. The rest of the tables are awkwardly placed, and they just don't feel as cozy or inviting as the other parts of the restaurant. Because of that, customers almost never want to sit there. If they ask for a booth, which they usually do, I can't just tell them no. Half my training as a host was about meeting customer requests and never flat out rejecting them unless it's truly impossible. So when people insist on booths, this section gets skipped in the rotation a lot. That's exactly what happened tonight. An elderly couple came in and specifically asked for a booth near the bathroom. The next turn in the rotation happened to be that unpopular section, but the couple's request didn't match up with what was available there. I seated them where they wanted, just like I'm trained to do, and kept things moving. Not long after, the server assigned to that section stormed up to me. She was clearly frustrated and asked why she kept getting skipped. I explained calmly. The couple asked for a booth near the bathroom, and none were available in her section. She immediately shot back with, "Well, it's not the first time I've gotten skipped." I tried to remind her that customers always ask for booths and that it's nothing personal. It happens to every section at some point, but she didn't want to hear it. She demanded, "Okay, well, what are you going to do to make up for me not getting tables?" I just stood there stunned for a moment because what did she expect me to say? I wanted to reply with, how about I Venmo you $20 to leave me alone? But of course I didn't. Instead, I explained that I understand it's frustrating, but this isn't something I control. I don't enjoy dealing with picky people either, but part of the job is accommodating them. If I told a customer they had to sit in her section, even when they specifically asked for something else, I'd basically be inviting an argument. She wouldn't let it go. She kept nagging about how she was losing money because she wasn't getting seated, and she made it sound like it was all my fault. I apologized again, but repeated that it's not up to me. The decision to prioritize customer preference comes straight from management, not from the host stand. What made it even more frustrating was that this wasn't the first time we'd had this exact conversation. Every time she gets stuck with that section, she corners me and complains. And every time I have to remind her that I don't make the rules and I don't assign the seating charts. Tonight she was sharper than usual, meaner in tone, like she was getting bolder about blaming me. The thing is, she's not permanently stuck with that section. Management rotates servers around the restaurant specifically, so no one gets screwed with a bad section every shift. Everyone gets their turn with it, and no one else has ever made a fuss the way she does. Other servers take the hit when it's their turn, shrug it off, and move on. She's the only one who can't seem to grasp that customer preference comes first, no matter what. At this point, I've accepted that dealing with her frustration is part of my shifts whenever she's scheduled in that section. But the way she keeps pressing for me to make it up to her, as if I owe her something, is exhausting. I'm just trying to do my job and keep customers happy, and instead I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of a battle I never signed up for. That's the end of the story. That one makes you realize how intense restaurant dynamics can get. It's wild how one person can make a tough section feel even heavier by refusing to accept the setup. The host sounded patient, but you could feel how draining it was to explain the same thing over and over. Honestly, it shows how much pressure lands on the host stand, even when the issue isn't their fault. This next story is about someone fed up with their upstairs neighbor's nonstop noise and chaos, who decided to get a little creative with payback. Living in an apartment can test your patience sometimes, but my upstairs neighbors take things to another level. From the moment they moved in, it felt like peace and quiet became a distant memory. The first thing I noticed was the stomping. And I don't mean walking around normally, I mean stomping. It's wild how much noise they're able to make just moving from one room to another. It sounds like a marching band practices above me on a daily basis. And it's not just stomping. There are constant crashes, bangs, and thuds, as if they're running into walls or dropping furniture. A big part of it comes from the fact that they don't take their kid outside. Their child has a disability and a lot of energy, and instead of letting him run around outdoors, they let him crash all over the apartment at any time of the day. So the walls shake, the floors vibrate, and it feels like living underneath the playground that never closes. As if that weren't enough, they've got a personal life that's just as loud as their stomping. They're poly, and they bring random people home on a regular basis, and they don't keep it private. Sometimes it's with the window wide open. Sometimes it's literally out on the balcony. And they are loud. It's not just something you can ignore by turning up the TV. It's the kind of thing that forces you to become an unwilling audience member to parts of your neighbors' lives you never wanted to know about. Then there's the flooding. Yes, flooding. They've managed to flood their bathroom 6 separate times. Each time, the water leaks straight into my apartment. I've had dripping ceilings, soggy walls, and more than one frantic moment with buckets and towels trying to save my own belongings from water damage. 6 times. That's not an accident anymore. That's just negligence. I tried to be reasonable at first. I didn't want to run straight to the building management or the strata board. I thought maybe approaching them directly as neighbors would help. So I knocked on their door more than once and asked nicely if they could try to tone things down. At least a little. Every time they brushed me off or nodded politely. But then things only seemed to get worse afterward. It felt like the more I asked, the louder they got, almost as if it was intentional. So I stopped asking. Instead, I started planning. One day, the main guy from upstairs, the loudest stomper of them all, casually mentioned to me when he usually gets home from work. I don't know why he volunteered that information, but he did. He gets back around 4:30 in the afternoon, and that gave me an idea. Now, every single day from 4:30 to 5:30, I dedicate myself to what I call my concert hour. I go into my shower because the acoustics in there bounce sound perfectly, and I put on the loudest, most relentless music I can manage. I sing, I play, I belt it out. I make sure it's impossible for him to relax the second he steps through his door. The timing couldn't be more perfect because it catches him right when he's trying to wind down after work. I don't even feel guilty about it. After all the stomping, the balcony antics, and the floods, I figure this is fair game. If they won't give me peace and quiet, then I'm not about to hand it over to them either. At the very least, I get the satisfaction of knowing I've carved out 1 hour of their day that's just as disruptive to them as they've been to me. And honestly, it feels good. That's where the story ends. That one had me smiling because sometimes petty revenge really does sound satisfying. The image of someone turning their shower into a daily concert hall just to mess with their noisy neighbors is kind of hilarious. It's like flipping their own chaos back onto them in the most creative way. Definitely feels like a case of play loud games, win loud prizes. This next story is about a teenager caught in the middle of divorced parents, clashing rules, and a mom who banned their phone but now wants money toward a new one. I'm 13, and my parents divorced about 4 years ago. Ever since, custody has been split 50-50 between their houses. For the most part, I've gotten used to living between two homes, but every so often, something comes up that makes it really frustrating. This whole situation with my phone is one of those times. About a year ago, my dad gave me a phone. It didn't even have a SIM card in it. It was just an old phone that used to belong to his girlfriend. I honestly thought at first that it was only for when I was at his house, but then about 8 months ago, right around Christmas, he told me I could start bringing it with me to my mom's house too. At that point, I wasn't sure how my mom would react, but she didn't say anything. I didn't hide the fact that I had it either. I made it very clear that I had brought it with me, and since she didn't comment on it, I just kept bringing it back and forth between both homes for about 8 months straight. Then, right before school started, everything changed. Out of the blue, my mom sent my dad an email saying the phone was no longer allowed at her house. No conversation with me, no heads up, just a flat out ban. That first week without my phone at her place was rough. I'll admit, I was rude. I was upset and I didn't really handle it well. But what made it worse was how she talked to me about it. She kept saying things that came across as really condescending. Stuff like, everything you can do on the phone, you can do on your iPad. Or, it's only been a week, be patient. Or even, it's going to distract you from school. The thing is, my iPad is 9 years old. The touchscreen barely works. It freezes constantly, and half the time it doesn't even register when I try to tap something. On top of that, I had just gotten 100% on my first 2 tests of the school year. So the argument that my phone would ruin my focus for school didn't really make sense. The next week, when I went back to her house, she brought up what she called a proposal. Basically, she wanted to buy me a new phone, but only if I paid for half of it. At first I said it sounded like a great idea, but then my dad stepped in and told her that if she got me a new phone, then it wouldn't be allowed at his house. That complicated everything. So I ended up not wanting to go through with it. Fast forward to today, I showed up at her place and she had another new proposal. This one was even stranger. She told me that if I gave her $400, she would take the money, buy herself a new phone, and then hand me her current one. I just stared at her because I couldn't believe she was serious. It felt ridiculous. First, she bans me from having my phone at her house after I've been bringing it for 8 months without issue. Then she tries to frame these deals as though she's doing me some big favor, when really it's just me funding her phone upgrade. I was upset and I told her so. We ended up having a big argument. She called me super entitled. At that point, I snapped back and said, if that's the case, then you only have yourself to blame for that. That's where the story ends. That one really shows how messy things can get when divorced parents have totally different rules. The part about the mom offering to trade her phone if the kid handed over $400 was wild. You can feel how frustrating it must be to be stuck between two adults pulling in opposite directions. It's the kind of situation where no matter what, the kid ends up being the one caught in the middle. This next story is about a hotel manager dealing with a guest who missed the group booking deadline and then accused them of terrible customer service for not bending the rules. I had just wrapped up a night shift and was about to head home when the phone rang. Normally, I'd be done by then, but since my general manager hadn't arrived yet and I was still technically the front office manager until the handoff, I picked it up. On the other end was a woman asking for my GM. She was upset right off the bat, explaining that she had been trying to reach him for days. She said she had called on Sunday, and someone told her he would be in Monday. Then, on Monday, she called again, but missed him because he had already left for the day. And now, here she was calling Tuesday, and he still wasn't there. She made it sound like he was deliberately avoiding her. I asked what the issue was, and she explained that she wanted to book into a volleyball group block for this Friday. The problem was the code wasn't working online, and she had been told that the only one who could override it was the GM. That's when I had to break the news. The cutoff date for the group block had already passed. The rooms were booked, and whatever hadn't been used had been released back into the system at the regular full rate. The block was closed, done, finished. That's how group bookings work. I tried to offer her something reasonable, I gave her the AAA rate, which is still a discount compared to the full price, but she wasn't having it. The Friday night rate was $309 before taxes, and even with the discount, she didn't think it was acceptable. She launched into a long rant, telling me how unfair it was that she'd be the only parent paying more than the others. She said everyone else got the cheaper group rate because they booked earlier, and she didn't want to be the schmuck paying full price. For 15 minutes, she kept repeating the same points, trying to guilt me into making an exception. At one point, she even asked me directly, "Do you think this is good customer service or not?" The truth is, in her mind, good customer service meant giving her exactly what she wanted, regardless of policy or deadlines. But I wasn't going to entertain that line of questioning, so I didn't bother answering. I stayed calm and explained her options again. She could book at the discounted rate I offered, she could shop around online, or she could stay at the hotel across the street. Those were the choices. But the more I stood my ground, the more upset she became. She told me I was a terrible manager. She said that if it were up to her, I'd be fired, and that if she behaved this way at her job, she would have been fired a long time ago. I didn't argue back, didn't raise my voice, didn't say anything mean. I just repeated the facts and tried to move the conversation along, though she hardly let me get a word in. Then she threatened me. She said she would talk to the entire team and have them pull all of their rooms out of the block, that they'd never stay at our hotel again. I reminded her that the cutoff date had been listed clearly in the reservation link that was sent out when the block was created. She insisted she never got that link from the coach, and that's when it really hit me. She was making herself out to be so important that the whole team would supposedly cancel their rooms over her frustration. But if she was really that important, why hadn't the coach even made sure she got the link? In the end, nothing changed. She vented, she threatened, she insulted me. But the group block was still closed, and the options I offered her were still the only options available. Sometimes being in customer service means standing firm, even when someone is determined to paint you as the villain. That's where this story finishes. That one shows how quickly bad customer service gets thrown around when it just means not getting my way. What stood out was how patient the worker stayed through a 15-minute rant while still holding the line. It's a reminder that sometimes the loudest guests are also the ones who ignored every email, deadline, and detail beforehand. Anyways, that's all the stories I have for you today, and I hope it was a chill listen. If you had a good time, dropping a like and hitting that subscribe button really helps me out. And as always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.